Hey everyone, this is Kirk here again at Option Alpha, and welcome back to the Option Alpha podcast. This week we have a very special guest because I finally got him in here to do a podcast, and that is joining me on the podcast is my partner and the other founder here at Option Alpha, and that is Jack Slocum. So let's get right into the interview. All right, Jack, what's going on, man? Thanks for coming in here.
Hey, Kirk. Yes, we've been talking about this one for a while. I'm very happy that we're finally getting it in
It's
there.
good to get you on the podcast. I
Yeah.
have invited you 400 times. I think a couple times you said, "Yeah, I'm going to come on." And then you're like, "Nah, I don't know if I'm going to come on for this one." So we finally got you in here. Commitment to do the podcast interview, to share your story, which I don't think a lot of people have heard your story. I know there's parts of your story that I probably haven't even heard. Maybe we'll flush those out a little bit today. But I
Um,
think the parts that I have heard have always been pretty fascinating to me. And I've told you this before because you've known this before now, but like I think you're on this kind of like parallel journey or like transition-y journey, but there's like things moving in the same direction and maybe they're going at different speeds at different times, but you're definitely a person who seems to be moving in a very defined direction, but you're also kind of straddling the line of being a developer, being a trader, an entrepreneur, a dad, a father, like all of these different things that you're doing. So I think it's going to be interesting to kind of peel back some of those and go through that today because I know some of these stories, but a lot of people don't know these, which is why I want you on here.
yeah, sounds great. I'm excited to see what comes out. So I haven't been on the podcast specifically because, there's a lot of parts to my story maybe I don't want to share always. But I plan to be very open about kind of my story as an options trader during this podcast. So we'll see if we hit some nice spots.
Well,
It's
as I
been
told you,
quite an
there's
interesting journey for me personally, starting off, like you said, as a father. So when I started off on this options trading journey, it was I wanted to make some extra income to help support my family. I had a different company around that time that I was working on, and it wasn't a big success at first. So I needed to try to find ways to earn extra income on the side. And that kind of backfired at first and was not a good trading experience. And since then, I've been trying to learn as much as possible. And
so let's take it back. Let's take it back
yeah,
to
yeah,
the
yeah,
beginning.
yeah.
So let's take it back to the beginning. So like let's take the options trading side first, okay? So like where did you start as an options trader? What's the origin story of that? Because you were not always an options trader. I wouldn't say you were even trained as an options trader. I don't know if anybody's trained as an
Yeah,
options
yeah.
trader, but like you didn't want to do like you didn't wake up and you're like, I'm gonna be an options trader, for the rest of my life. No.
Well, I didn't really have a lot of capital. So when I first started off, I was trading stocks, and I was using a platform. This was way back in like 2007, 2008, called Ninja Trader.
Hmm.
And I was trying to code up some algorithms on it and do some stuff, but it was primarily trading stocks. And I was like, if the MACD indicator's here and the RSI is here and this is here, it's
100%
definitely a
winner.
buy,
Right.
and it's a guaranteed winner. But I really, even when I set up those particular trading strategies, I really didn't have enough capital to leverage them and make, I might make $2, it was like very small amounts of money I was working with. And then I discovered options and I was like, wow, so I can leverage 100 contracts and it only costs me $1 per share. This is amazing. And so I had a bit of a crash and burn moment through all of that, though, of learning, like most people, buying calls and puts.
I
That's
was
where I
gonna say,
started
was it the
off. Yeah.
beginning was calls and puts, no
Yeah,
spreads,
of course.
just
Yeah. Yeah.
single directional, right? Yeah, of
Calls and
course.
puts. And we had the big market downturn in 2008. And so I was in the middle of all of that, learning to trade options. And it was definitely an interesting time to be learning. That's for sure. Yeah.
And then so where
Um,
did it go from there? So, I mean, because your background is actually, this is where we can kind of cross back and forth as we go, but like your background is not as an options trader. So you even said like you were trying to program your own trades at that point, right? I mean, nobody was doing that. Like
yeah.
2000, 2000-ish, the internet was just really kind of, blowing up, right? So
Well,
What
there was a
like
parallel then to the parallel that we have today. So today I'm working on Option Alpha nonstop, and we're building this platform. We have this amazing community of traders, and there's always something new that we need to create. At that time, I was working on another company, and there was an amazing group and an amazing community, and there was a lot of things that we needed to create for them. And so I wanted to figure out how I could leverage my coding background to separate myself from the trading that I was doing. And that was, even in the very beginning, that was one of the things I really wanted to do because one, I'm an explosive person, and when things aren't going well, I tend to go back to like a gambler's mindset that I had. Oh, if I lose two in a row, I'm going to win the next one for sure, or things like that. And I wanted to eliminate as much of that from the trading that I was doing. And then there was the ability to actually be very, very systematic as well when I was coding. So I
was
think
it more so about like having a system, or do you think it was more about like trying to figure out what your edge you could bring to the market was, you know?
well, in those very early days, very early, I was looking at technical indicators. And
So
so
that was your system,
I
essentially.
was like most newbie
Right.
traders, I thought technical indicators were guaranteed to win.
Right.
You know,
Right.
oh, the RSI is below 30, all
100% win.
day, put
Right.
all my money in, right?
Right.
So like that was kind of how it was. And so I wanted to use coding so I didn't have to sit there and wait for RSI to drop below 30.
Mm-hmm.
Things that we take for granted now in Option Alpha.
Right.
So yeah, that back then though, I had to code it in actual code. So yeah.
Yeah, which I've seen some of that before, and I don't ever want to see it again. I mean,
No, no,
I've
it's
seen that
pretty,
it's
yeah.
ridiculous. It's crazy. So, okay, so but your tech background. So like take us back to what you did before even options trading, because that even before then, you weren't doing options trading. Because I think that story, like the reason I want you to tell it more is because that story to me kind of shows the evolution of how you became, a better options trader, how you've evolved as a trader, right? Is because it comes from that tech background and what you were doing.
Yeah, no, I've been doing tech for a long time, been working on companies. The company that I've been referring to was called Sencha eventually, but the original name was EXTJS. We created one of the very first toolkits for building what we take for granted now in the web browser. So the ability to actually build applications in JavaScript in the web browser. It was very cutting edge and ahead of its time. Um, it's one of the greatest things I ever built and worked on, and the strength of it really was our community. Similar, it's kind of what we're doing here with
Mhm.
Option Alpha as well, is like the strength of the platform is the fact that there's all these traders who are willing to share what they're learning, and that gives us an opportunity to make it better for everyone. It was the same thing there, is like we had this great community, everyone was sharing what they were doing, and it gave us the opportunity to make this framework, which was used by 8 out of the top 10 financial institutions, over 70% of the Fortune 500. It was very popular and used by everyone. And um, through that process, uh, I learned how to work with the community and, build technology based on the needs of an entire group of people.
And do you think it was like a
How
lot
that
of the shareable stuff too? Because you always talked about like, and I know I've heard you talk about it so many times, but like the libraries that were built, very similar to the fact that we have a library now, and like the idea of
Yeah.
like shareable technology, was that
Oh
like
yeah, 100%. So like
Mhm.
we provided the core framework that everyone used, and then people built these what we called extensions that went on top of that. And the core library itself was an extension of a library that Yahoo put out originally, but we eventually abandoned that and created our own core library. But it started off as an extension of a library called Yahoo UI that no longer exists. And same thing applies to our community as well. Now with Option Alpha is we're creating this technology stack that allows people to build bots with no coding, and then they build bots that are basically like an entire automated trading system, and then they share them in the community with other members. And obviously you and I are doing the same thing, trying to lead that charge.
Right. So
Yeah.
what do you think from all that tech stuff that you've done? What do you take that over, like now transitioning back to options trading, right? So
Right.
you've done so much tech and crazy amounts of like scaling problems and issues. What do you think are the big things that you transition and take over to options trading? Like, how do you think now about trading?
Well, I think in developing anything, you're facing challenges nonstop, challenges that are unknown. And I think as an options trader, we face the exact same thing nonstop. Is so we obviously we have back testing and things where we can test across scenarios in the past, but every moment that you're going through as an options trader is a unique moment that has never existed before. Sure, there's similar situations before in the past, but this moment that we're in right now, for example, where you might have a tweet going out, or no one's ever experienced the type of
Some
things that,
people right now are like, please no, did he tweet right now? I believe,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
could happen
So,
at any point. Yeah.
so every market is unique, and until you face the challenges and pitfalls of that particular market, um, it's really hard to predict what exactly is going to happen. And that's a lot of what happens in technology as well. It's kind of like when we're building features into the Option Alpha platform, for example, exit options, when we first put them out there. And then people start doing various different things with them that we didn't think, wow, okay, they're
Mhm.
going to do that. They're going to want to update the exit options and they're going to do that every 1 minute. And that's going to require us to save that data to the database every 1 minute. But wait, there's hundreds of thousands of bots doing that every 1 minute. And the amount of data that is contained within that exit options blob is a lot of data. That's a unique problem that we need to figure out how to scale and solve. And so there's a lot of that logical thinking that transfers over into options trading for sure. Yeah.
And what do you think are some of those like early things that you did that you look back on now and you go like, ooh, I don't know.
Where
You,
I still sometimes get into this, but I loved earnings trades. So, and I would bet enormous amounts of money. Sometimes I would be so confident that I would bet like half of my money on an earnings
oh
trade.
my gosh, that would just
Yeah.
like absolutely, my heart hurt. Right? My
Yeah.
heart hurt.
Yeah, it was, yeah. And there was one, probably my favorite story from that time was, and I won't use dollar amounts because it's very scary dollar amounts, but I had bet that JP Morgan was going to miss on its earnings trade or on its earnings report. And instead they beat like they typically do, and their stock skyrocketed. And I was sitting there and I had leveraged a tremendous amount of money that I could not afford to be leveraging. It was purely gambling. At the time, I was actually in Vegas. So this was during another era of my life. I was actually in Vegas. And what happened is the next day I woke up and I pulled out my phone and I looked and their stock was tumbling and I had no idea why. And I found the news report, which was that they had
Was guidance.
fictitiously, yeah, no, they had there was something that they doctored on their earnings report
Mm-hmm.
and made the numbers look inflated, but they weren't actually real. And that caused their stock to tumble. And I'm sitting there on my phone, sell, sell, sell. I had 15,000 contracts. So just to put that
Oh
in,
my gosh.
yeah. So that was probably the one of the more risky trades I ever took back then. So what I learned out of that era, when I look back and cringe, it was I used to put I had so much um, belief in one particular trade that I was willing to risk a tremendous amount of money on it, like a lot of my bankroll. Whereas now I try to spread it across lots of different strategies and lots of smaller trades.
It's funny, B, I don't know if you know this, but I remember actually sitting down before we actually came together, merged companies, and put this whole thing together many, many years ago. And it was actually in Florida. We were sitting at a taco stand. And I remember actually debating about this with you before we actually fully came together. And you were ta telling me about this something, and I was like, I don't know, I'm very conservative. Like you're a different trader than I am, but I think we've both kind of grown in trading, of course, but like I do remember actually debating this with you early on, and I think you have changed completely. Where you're like, I'm not going to do that anymore. So
Right.
like that whole change. So, but that leads me to another set of questions, which is on like kind of your Vegas stories and your background in gambling and stuff like that, because I know you have some crazy stories there. But it is fascinating to me the side of gambling, which I think there's like this stigma that people have with gambling. I'm not a gambler. I don't go like there's not even a casino even remotely near where I live, right? And I'm not one to like go to Vegas for the weekend and gamble at all. And there's a stigma that I think people have, which is that gambling is terrible, and that I understand that side of it. But there's lessons learned in there about
Mhm.
like like the probabilities and
Chaos.
the odds and chaos. Right. There's so many things in there. So tell us about kind of that, like
Well,
how, yeah, what happened and how it's kind of, transformed you.
before I became a father of four, well, I thrived on that type of chaos. So I really enjoyed it. I was a professional poker player for about a year and a half. I definitely the reason I started programming is actually I was playing blackjack, and when you go into the blackjack pit in the casino, back then they had these cards, and it was the book is what they called it, and it was like every if you end up with this is the play you're supposed to
Mhm.
make. And I always thought the casino, I don't know how much I trust them telling me what I should be doing when, it's obviously not in their best interest. So I wanted to write a program where I could test the book to see was it actually accurate. And when I got into programming, I had a book on like a programming language called Java. And all I really wanted to do was to build this algorithm where I could back test, basically. I could
All the
back
different
test
things in the book. That's fascinating.
all
I've
the
never heard that
possible,
part.
yeah,
Yeah,
basically I wanted to know. And then I also wanted to know is if the people around you made bad decisions, did that affect your outcome? Because that's another thing people
that's
believe when they're
fascinating.
playing
Yeah.
blackjack. Yeah. So that was my first like programming thing that I got into. But for me, what I learned from gambling, because I haven't been to Vegas in 13 years. So it's been a long time. I don't really gamble anymore. Now I trade options instead. So, but what I learned through all of that time was something that has stuck with me throughout, which is anything can happen. Anything can happen.
Mhm.
So, like, sometimes I would be in a poker game and the other person has one miracle card, and there's one card to go, and it's a 1 in 52 chance, or if there's, 42 cards left, that's very low odds.
Right.
And sometimes they would hit it, and sometimes that would happen 3 times in a row,
Yeah.
which is statistically impossible, but it happens.
It's not impossible. It's statistically small, right?
Right, right.
That's the difference. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so the lessons that I got out of that was the flip side can also happen. So there were times where, I started with very small amounts of money and was able to turn it into a mountain of money in a short period of time. And the way it happened was similarly, I hit these long shots and then I would lever up and I would hit another long shot and then I would hit another one. And sometimes that's just how it goes as well. And I think that though what I learned through all of that was just making sure one that you're making some type of calculated bet where if you're losing, you're not going to get wiped out. You always have a chance to continue on. And to well, ultimately what I learned was don't gamble, unless you have some type of system that you're working with, like as far as options trading
Do
goes.
you
That
think,
there's better ways to try to win money than having the odds against you. So the
right?
options trading, you can end up in a favorable position instead.
And so talk about this a little bit because that's something that me and you've talked about so many times. And it's something that has actually changed for me over the last couple of years where I would say like 5 years ago, maybe, I would say I was mostly 70, 80% chance of success trader. Like
Mhm.
most of my trades were that. I was very high probability.
Right.
And now I've transitioned where it's not always so high probability. Yes, I have some bots that run that, kind of target that are a little bit more conservative. But I also have bots that are, backtesting wise should win 20% or
Right.
30% of the time or 50% of the time. Like it's literally a coin flip. And so when you talk about that, having favorable odds, maybe just talk a little bit more about that because I think that a lot of people get into it, and me and you have seen this where it's like, hey, I traded this 90% strategy and then I lost. And it's like,
Right.
well, yeah, like the 10% could happen. So,
And not only that, but it can happen more than once in a row, and it
mhm.
can happen right when you start. So part of it is a gambling story that goes along with that was I was this one time I was playing craps, and it was 14 hours I was playing craps straight.
Oh
This is
my
back
God.
from, yeah. So I didn't eat. I refused to drink any water. I was on this roll, and I rolled for, if anyone has played craps, I rolled for 2 hours straight.
It's almost impossible, right?
Right. And the
Right.
goal is to just not roll seven when
Right.
you're right.
Which
So what
is,
was
again,
happening is
statistically the highest outcome for two dice anyway.
right,
So,
right, of course, yeah.
yeah.
what had happened is I was going through a bad streak where I was losing. So craps is one of those games that gives you the ability to bet against yourself. So what I did in that moment was I decided on the next roll I was going to switch. And instead of betting that I was going to throw good dice, I bet against myself. And for a period of probably an hour, I rolled and never crapped out, never rolled a seven, betting against myself over and over and over for a tremendous amount of money until eventually I was like, okay. And I
And
switched
then
back.
crapped.
No, no. Then I
No.
won for like
Then you
another
won.
hour
Oh
and
my
won
gosh.
all of
Yeah.
my money back. Thank God. Right. So it was a miracle that was. Um, but the important lesson there is what could have been was I went through this losing streak and then I had this 2 hour streak where I should have won so much money. But because I switched the strategy midway, I went through the bad part on one side and then the bad part on the other side. And I think as
Mm-hmm.
an options trader, when you're talking about these strategies, is a lot of times what happens is, and I've actually recently saw a thread in the community, it was like, hey, I keep losing when I do this. Should I bet the other way? And it makes me
Very
think about it.
common. Like it's a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
common mental thing to think, of course. Yeah.
Right. And I more think about it as looking at a stock chart. It has this period where it goes up and then it has a period where it goes down and it has a period where it goes up. And if you're constantly switching back and forth, you could potentially lose nonstop. Versus if you go through the ups and downs, and you know that eventually it goes up. So as a
Mhm.
trader, what I learned from that experience that day is something that stuck with me forever, which is if I have a reason why I'm running a particular strategy, stick with the strategy even through the down parts. That's for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And is it just that, like that confidence comes from going through that period, but does it come from something else like, back testing or just like the idea like you talked about like long shots. And I know you run like a long shot strategy right now, right? So
Right, right,
like it's this idea that like at some point it's going to hit and I don't know when that's going to happen or, how long it's going to be, but I got to keep the strategy running because that's the strategy. The strategy is a
right.
long shot.
I think back testing helps a lot with that. So I have one bot that I'm running that has now lost 30 trades in a row.
Mm.
$300 a pop. It's brutal. And before that, it won one trade for a small amount and it lost like 22 in a row before that. So overall, it's like one out of 50 trades that it's won. Um, and believe it or not, it's just breaking even. So before that, it had other streaks and won a few. But when you look at the back test, that's completely normal. So as a trader, I'm sitting there and I'm waiting, and every once in a while it hits a monster one, but it loses the entire time. And so if I set my expectations accordingly, I can just trade it, and I know that that's going to happen, and I just can't let it affect me. So
So speak about that. Like, so the affecting thing, I know you personally because we talk so many times. I know that you
mhm,
can be affected 100% by trades, as can I, as can
right,
everybody else.
100%. Yeah,
Right. And I've heard you even say, you're like, I can't look at this right now, but I just can't take my eyes off it, like looking at
yeah,
trades. How have you changed? Because I feel like you have made a shift. I don't know if you've made the full shift that you want to make totally, but I know like a couple of years ago, you were trading pretty frequently, even manually hybridish trading, right?
right.
Where you would do like you would place the trade, but then you let the bots manage the trade. And it seems like you're making more of a shift or have made more of a shift toward fully automated. And is that in part because you just emotionally it feels better to go through that? Like you don't
Well,
have
I
to go
think
through those trades.
Yeah, I think there was a learning experience because now I'm kind of back the other way again.
Mm,
So I needed to go through the learning experience of separating my emotions and my constant attention from my trades
mm,
because that was really my downfall as a trader for many years. So just to share openly my story is the early part of my trading experience, I lost nonstop and I lost a tremendous amount of money and I just continued to pour into it and I had gotten to a point where rather than thinking logically about the trades that I was making, I was trying to make up for the losses I had previously done and continued to pour money into the same bets against the market, for example, that the market's going to go down at some point. And instead of looking at the market objectively, is it going to go up or is it going to go down and trying to form a conclusion, I would just constantly pour in to the market's got to go down. It's got to go down. And
mhm.
so My backstory with a lot of that was losing over a tremendous amount of time. And the reason why I started doing that was the gambler's fallacy. It's like, okay, this has happened 10 days in a row, so it definitely can't
Can't
happen
happen.
the next
Right.
day.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so the important part was to separate myself for a long period of time from the emotional component, from making decisions in the moment, and I still struggle with that, of course, but making decisions in the moment that are not based on logic, but based on either gambler's fallacy or some type of emotional component. And I went fully automated, like maybe like a year plus ago, as part of the options trading series. I ultimately decided to go automated. I was doing earnings and various different things in the beginning of that series, and that was great for me for a long period of time. Um, these days, I'm doing more gamma exposure trading. So some of the newer stuff that we have introduced, and they are manual trades. And I am finding myself looking during the day. However, what I have improved at is separating myself from those trades. So I'm getting in there. Here's why I'm making this trade. I'm making it because of this particular gamma level, and it's giving me this information. So I'm going to make the trade. And the latest videos I've been publishing. Obviously, if anyone wants to know what I'm talking about, they're up on Option Alpha's YouTube. But that I make the trade, I set my profit target, and I'm done. I'm not going to sit there and watch
Watch.
it and
Right.
like, chase and do all that kind of stuff. So I've managed to most of the time separate myself from the trading that I'm doing. And that's been really the part that allows me to get back into more of a hybrid trading environment.
Right.
Although I would love to fully automate what I'm doing in the
Gamma's a little tougher though.
exposure.
It
It's tough
really
though.
is. Yeah.
It's a big perspective that you need that
Mhm.
factors in a lot of data that you have to learn.
Right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Multiple data points, not just like a MACD line or an RSI line
right,
going down. Yeah. So,
right. There's many data points, and you have to make a calculated decision sometimes in the moment based on which direction it's going towards this strike or towards that strike. And there's many different variables, including the next day's data that you have to factor in order to make that decision.
right.
Yeah,
100%. All right. So let's go back just a little bit here. So we've talked often about, and maybe not all the time, but we have talked often that, your company that you had at one point and the old OG Option Alpha merged into this new Option Alpha back in 2018.
right.
And it was a merger that made a lot of sense because you had developed trading technology. We had an education platform. A little bit of technology wasn't as great as your technology, obviously. And we tried to, our mission's always been how can we kind of put these things together and how can we, build this? But from your side, where are the origins of what is now Option Alpha? Like, where does that come from? How did it evolve?
All right. So I'll be transparent a bit more about my personal story. I shared earlier that I had this other company, EXTJS, that I ultimately had a lot of success with. I sold that company and I decided I was going to retire at the ripe old age of, I don't know, I think it was 34, which didn't last very long. During that time period, I started trading options more and more and more. This was also around the period where I tell the stories of Vegas and other things like that. So I wasn't really in the best of mindsets at that time, had a lot going on in my life. I ended up losing a large percentage of, basically what I worked my whole life to get with that company. And as part of that, there was a point where I needed to start over again. And I moved away to North Carolina and lived by myself with a cat for a while and started working on a trading platform that I had dreamed of forever, which was one that was automated trading for options. And
So, and let
yeah,
me just interject here and say, like, why didn't you just say screw options? Like, that's always been a question I've had. It's like, if I did that, and if I know myself, it's like, if I did that, there would be a part of me that's like, I want to figure this out. But you went to the, no, 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 like, I'm going to figure this type of thing out.
yeah. So I just, there's no way I was giving up. I thought that I still believe options trading is an amazing opportunity for people. I think so as someone who comes from a gambling background, and, had played poker and did all those things, the odds that I was looking for in poker nonstop. And it was like, if I can get these types of odds
Mhm.
on a particular hand, I'm willing to go all in. Those type of odds, like as a options trader, we're constantly in positions where we can make very intelligent trades. And then unlike when you go to the casino where they have various different betting ranges that you're allowed to do that limit your ability to make a comeback if you lose, there's nothing like that on the options market. So you can always change how you're using your betting strategy or whatever in order
No
to.
table limits.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
no
yeah. There's
limits
no
on it.
table
Right.
limits. Right,
Right.
exactly. So I look at it as a humongous opportunity. And the weakness that I see in it is, of course, the emotional component and the decision making under pressure in the moment. For me, it was I have these 7 strategies going right now, and the market's selling off, for example. What am I going to do? Well, if they're four-legged strategies and I'm looking at a screen where they're all individual option legs, like the old school think or swim, for example, like I now have 28 positions to manage, manually in the moment. They're all losing. The overwhelm is just like
Yeah,
leveled.
as I say, you've been like
Yeah.
talking about it now. Thinking about going back to that gives me nightmares.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, I feel
Yeah.
it as well. Like
Yeah.
I feel how I felt back then. It was terrifying in those moments, and because it was I could lose everything I had out there at that moment. And so that caused me to like, okay, I'm going to close all these with the market order. I'm going to do that. I got to get out as fast as possible. And then getting back into new trades when it turns back around, it's like, oh, it's turning back around. I just lost all that money. Now I have to,
Nope.
so
And then it goes right back down. And
right,
then it goes right
exactly.
back
So
down.
that
Yeah.
mental aspect in the moment when there's a lot of pressure is where we make most of the mistakes that cost us potentially 3 months previous worth of profits.
Right.
So I might
100%.
trade great
Mhm.
for 3 months and then
15 minutes
in
screws it
one
up.
moment
Hmm.
lose the entire 3 months worth of trading. And so what I wanted was to build technology that would help me not to do that because that's how I lost previously. So I really wanted something that I could say, this is the way I want to trade. And I'm just going to let it run. This is what Wall Street's doing. This is what quants are doing. They're having success. Hedge funds are doing this. I want this for myself as well. And so
So
that's
when
why I
did it
built
transition though? Like when did it move from you
me.
building stuff to, for you to saying like, okay, maybe because when I got introduced to you, it wasn't yours. You had
Right,
already
right.
built
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
It was already released actually for other traders.
So once I created it for myself and it worked and it made the first trade and it was successful and it was a winner, I showed my friends. And I had a great group of friends who were willing to support me and invest in what I was doing. They all invested. And I moved from my place alone in North Carolina to New York City and met a whole bunch of people who helped me turn what was at that point just a dream for me into an actual trading platform that ran in the cloud that could be shared with other people. And then ultimately, obviously, I touched base with you and we started talking, and you
So then
had,
we redid it all over again.
and then we basically decided to take what I had built and make it no code,
Right.
which was the first of its kind as well. So it was a great experience, obviously with its own challenges and ups and downs.
Hmm.
But it's been a great journey. It's something I
So
really enjoy.
speaking of that journey, how do you, so by the way, that story to me, like I've told you so many times, but I'll say it here on the podcast, but like that story of the origins of why you did this, for those who don't hear us talk all the time, and we talk almost daily, multiple times a day, like that origin story continues to run through most of what we talk about at Option Alpha for people because it's always how can we give them things that they need? Sometimes it's things that they ask for, but sometimes it's also things that they're not directly asking for. They're not saying I need this thing, but it's like a sub like conscious or sub level thing that's like, well, no, what they really need is this. So maybe before we keep going, can you talk a little bit about that? Because there's so many times where, like, I don't know, we get inbound feature requests and ideas all the time. And so you're sitting there going, okay, how do I, sift through all this stuff and figure out what do people need? But then also, like, at the individual level, what do I need as a trader? Because if I need something as a trader, then surely the next trader is going to need that.
Yeah, no, that's the most important part is like there's a certain level of responsibility that we have as well. So there's a huge number of people on the platform now who are trading their life savings. They're trading their 401ks. They're trading, the money that they have taken across their life and saved up the
Mhm.
same way I was doing back then. And so it's a humongous amount of responsibility for us to always figure out, okay, well, what decisions can we make as a business that will not only enable them to achieve the success that they're looking to make and grow that nest egg that they have, but also do it responsibly and safely where, like for example, we choose not to support undefined risk strategies. And the theory is, or the logic behind it is black swans do happen. And we don't want our traders to lose everything they saved, their whole lives for when that happens. So the other part is, where you mentioned the feature requests. So we definitely get a tremendous number of feature requests and people who are looking for us to add various things to the platform. We go through a process where we prioritize those. Obviously, I'm using the platform, you're using the platform, everyone on the team is an options trader who's using the platform. So we all have needs that we're looking for to be added. And then we receive the feature requests that come in through the community nonstop. And there's a process by what we're trying to do is figure out which will have the greatest impact for the
Mhm.
maximum number of people in the platform. So in the coding world, we call this the 80-20 rule. Is like, basically uh, you get a tremendous number of feature requests, but in order for one to actually be approved, it has to be usable by a certain percentage of the actual user base. If it's down in the bottom 20%, the chances of it being implemented are very low. If it's in the 80%, the chances of it getting implemented are very high. So when we're looking at the feature requests that come in, we're definitely looking from that perspective, trying to figure out which will have the greatest impact. But then I'm also trading live on YouTube with my own account, and I'm losing and I'm winning. And as I'm going through that process, I'm trying to create technology that helps me to improve and then to share that with our community of traders. So that was how our zero DTE backtester was born. Earnings Edge and some of the earnings related stuff were part of that process. Trade Ideas was originally part
Right.
of that process
Mhm.
as well. Um,
Exit options, all of them.
Exit options, all of it. All
Yeah.
of it was something like, as a trader, man, I wish that it had this. And then we implement that, and it does have that. And so much of building the platform for me personally comes specifically from using it as a trader and trying to achieve success as a trader. And I find that every little thing that we add on to the platform that is something that has a big impact for our traders typically had a big impact for me as well.
Yeah,
So
I
I
think
think
I think that speaks for the whole team because like there will be times where we will see something come in and all of us, because we're all trading on the platform, we're all using it, we'll all say at the same time in chat or Slack or whatever, we'll say, yes, 100%. I
that,
do a workaround for this, or I can't do this, but I wish I could do this. So it is those things that's like, yes, those things impact us. But I also think, and maybe you could chat a little bit about this too, is like there's also things that what's the quote from like Henry Ford? If people wanted like they didn't
yeah,
ask for a car, they asked for would have asked for a
faster
faster
horses.
horse.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
It's like there's other component that I think is very fascinating in this space because it is very much a blue ocean in the sense that like nobody's ever really done this. Like and we when we
right.
even came out with the original version, many people were like, I don't even know if you could really do it, you know? Um, but this sense of like building something that is actually the need versus the
Mhm.
stated need. I don't know if that
Right,
makes
right,
sense.
right.
Yeah.
No, I think one of the beautiful things about the community is we come up with these ideas, we share them. An example would be opening range breakout
Mhm.
recently is I implemented it in the way that I thought it should work for me. And then I shared that in the community. And then there was a whole group of people in a thread that said, actually, it'd be great if I had this and this and this and that. And there was a whole bunch of things that I had never even thought about. I would love to be able to test the width of the opening range, for
Right.
example. I was like, that's a great idea. I didn't think of that. So that ability for us to come up with an idea and then share it with a group of people and get their feedback, and they take our idea and make it better. And then that's what ultimately the community ends up with.
Right. So, all
Yeah.
right. So let's do a couple of these questions which I had here. So number one, first one, as we kind of get towards the end of this, but so we talked a lot about stuff that obviously huge journeys, lots of ups and downs.
Yeah,
Like there's been times where everything works and there's times where everything doesn't work. So, how do you stay inspired throughout that entire journey, right? And this could be as a trader, like going through drawdowns. It could be as an entrepreneur, as a father, as a developer. Like what makes you stay the course?
it's a great question. Well, first and foremost, I have to give credit to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who strengthens me in all I do. Um, my favorite verse is, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So he's definitely a major part of everything that I do in life as a father, as an entrepreneur, and as a trader. So when I go through drawdowns and specific things, um, there is a certain type of resilience that's always within me, always that I can tap into, that no matter what is happening, I can stay in a good state. And that's been something that's been a real blessing in my life. I do talk about it sometimes on my YouTube channel too. It's hard not to. Faith is definitely the number one thing in my life, and something that is what inspires me every day. So, yeah.
I think one that I've learned from you that I've taken, and now my kids do it because I've said it so much to my kids. I don't know if I've told you this, but a long time ago, there was a question, and you've said this before, but this is definitely one that I take from you, which is instead of we can't, it's how could we? And just
Yeah.
like reframing it. And I think if I could sum up, that's how I think about it now. It's like, okay, well, this doesn't work now, but like, how could we make it work? That doesn't mean it's going to solve it. Like something still might be unsolvable right now, but how could we then changes the whole perspective of it.
Yeah, no, you just reframed it. That's actually my thing on my profile is, I can do all things are possible for one who believes. And so that frame that you're taking there is exactly that. Is It's like, okay, yes, I know traditionally this is impossible, but if it was possible,
How could we do it?
how
Right.
could we do it? And that's just shifting it. That's just shifting the frame to believing that it's possible,
Right.
opens
Which
the
is a
door
huge
for,
step, which
yeah,
is a
it's
huge
the
step.
most important step. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
It's how
funny.
we
Just
solve problems as a business too.
it is funny. It's actually so I'm coaching my middle daughter's basketball team this season. Okay. It was the first time I'm coaching, and they just have like these little practices and games. They're just learning stuff. But a couple of the girls were like, we're going to lose all the time. And I was like, wrong mindset. And we had this whole talk about it, at one of the practices. And then the last game that they had, the one girl came in and she's the most negative one on the team, 100% the most negative girl on the team. Not my daughter, different girl, right? And she came in, she's like, I think we can win today. And I was like, well, okay. Like just a complete mindset shift. And they still ended up getting crushed and blown out, but they're learning and they're at least they have a better mindset on it. So, which is
Yeah,
which
that's
is really
great.
fun. So,
Yeah.
all right. So, what are the most important things you've learned in this journey? So, like getting back to like for traders. So, like talk to people who are traders right now because 99.9% of people listening to this, they're traders, right? So, as a trader, what have you learned in this journey? So, you've traded for a long time. You've seen a lot of markets. You've done hybrid, automated,
Mm.
everything in between. Like, what are the guiding principles? What have you learned?
Most important one is, never enter a trade unless you're willing to take the max loss. So
I
when I
don't
tell
think
that,
people do that.
no, no, of course. So when I tell the story how I lost so much money a long time ago, like money that was a humongous chunk of the company that I sold, it was because I was entering positions believing I could get out of those positions before it made it to a max loss. And yeah, that's not what happened. I ended up taking a humongous max loss that I couldn't afford. And that started a chain reaction of me chasing, trying to get back the money that I originally couldn't afford to lose, but yet I put into a trade. So now when I trade, every trade I make, I'm not going to get into it unless I'm willing to take a max loss. And in fact, most trades, I don't use a stop loss. I
I
can't
was just
remember.
gonna say, yeah.
I can't
Do you think
remember the
that
last
that's
time I
like where it
used
comes
one.
from? Like this idea, because we've seen it before where like people say, well, my stop loss was X. And it's like, well, that's great that you thought your stop loss was X, right? But
Right.
the market decided it
And
was
go right through it. And
right,
there's no guarantee of liquidity when things are going wrong.
right.
That's where I think, one of the spots where people get trapped is the fact that when markets are really tanking, bid-ask spreads get wide. No one wants to take your trade unless it's at the very end of the bid-ask spread, in which case you've already lost a great percentage of the position anyway. So you probably shouldn't take that exit.
Right.
So,
I think it's a great one to start with because I don't think that, and for those of you who've listened to this podcast for many years, I talk about this often, but you really have to consider like the fact that in the rare off chance that it goes to zero, that your position
Yeah.
goes to zero, like what does that mean? And another one that's always a fun one to throw back there too is like the most improbable thing could happen and sometimes does happen, and it will rip everyone's face off. And the example I use always is that oil went negative a couple of years ago.
Hmm.
Like, if you even said that, or if it was in a textbook, people would think that it was wrong and a misprint. But like, it actually went to the point of going negative. Like, crude oil was negative. They were paying you to take it. That totally changes like, you just have to think about those absolute extremes.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, so you were also talking earlier, I'm not even sure if I answered the question correctly about like 90% winners.
Yeah.
I never really make those trades ever. And the reason why is because I guess, well, I have the orb bot that I'm running, which sometimes gets into trades where it's can win $70. I have it set at 7.5%. So $75 and it's risking 925. But every time it makes one of those trades, I'm cringing because I don't like to risk $925 to win $75. That's one of those cases where I'm not sure I'm willing to take a max loss always. So, getting into trades, but if I did have to, I could, and I know that long term it's going to work out. So that's why I keep that pot going. But in many cases, there's taking very small, taking those high percentage trades where you don't want to take a max loss no matter what because you're not willing to is really a problem. So if I did that exact same example and I was trading 5 contracts and so was risking $5,000, which I would never want to risk on an individual trade, and then I had a stop loss set at, $1,000. So now I'm like, oh, I'm only actually risking
It's
$1,000.
100% right.
The
Yeah.
truth is, I'm still risking $5,000. And if I lose that $5,000, how will that affect my decision making in the rest of my trading? Well, you can best believe I'm going to start levering up long shot trades trying to get my $5,000 back. And so instead, I would prefer to get into a lot of trades where I have a lower probability of winning, but I'm only risking maybe $500 to win $500, for example, or something like that. But I might lose a bunch of them, and I constantly have a chance to come back and make another trade with a chance to get what I had um, previously. Uh,
Lost on the trade. Right.
I want to use the word bet, but I know that's not invest. It's not invest either. I'm not
It's a
sure.
bet. I
What
mean,
do
like
you
it's a
call it?
bet, like it's an option trade bet. It's a,
A trade.
probability
There
bet.
you go.
That's a
Yeah, I was
trade.
wondering
So,
what do you call it when you're in
yeah.
that? So if I trade $500, am I betting five
It's,
hundred
I
dollars?
call it a trade. Like it's a trade to
Okay.
me. But I can see bet. I can see either one. So I think you make a good point. And again, this is another area where I think, like we've talked about this so often where like I was originally mostly 80, 90, maybe not 90, but like 70, 80% probability of success
Hmm.
trader. But I have kind of gravitated more towards not only just because some of the research we've done before we published that shows that like 50, 60% probabilities are actually a little bit more, sticky for like a
Hmm.
probability. But also because I do agree, it's like I would much rather not go through what I've called before like the long night of a drawdown, where like if I
Hmm.
go through a drawdown, I've really got to stick it out and I got to stay the whole winter, and it's
Yeah,
like I've got to go through 9 months to get back to square one. And while that's okay, that doesn't always feel the best in the moment, and it's
100%.
so like going through those 55, 60% winners where it's like, okay, I can lose 250, but I'll make 270 on the next trade and my net difference is $20. That's what I'm going after.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So it's kind of like my opening range breakout bot right now is down $988 and it wins on average $75 a trade.
Mhm.
So it's going to be a while until it makes it back to profitability. So that's kind of, I don't like to be in that position very often. I would prefer to be in a position like my other bot, which I talked about earlier, which lost 31 trades in a row. But as soon as it wins one, it'll make up for all of those losers. I would rather be in that inverse position than the other one.
Right.
Uh, but it's good, I believe, as a trader to have a good balanced portfolio, which is why I'm running both. I have one that's higher percentage and one that's lower percentage. And over time, hopefully it will the higher percentage one will hopefully help support the lower percentage one until it actually hits.
Right.
Kind of the
A little bit
idea.
of like yin and yang. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing I think that's been very important to me over the course of options trading journey is always having a reason for every trade that I'm getting into. So early on, it was my
Fight.
reason is I'm down, like we were talking about, $5,000. So I'm going to get into this
I'm
long
gonna fight
shot
back.
trade, which has a
Right.
max profit of $5,000 so I can make a comeback. That was my reasoning. Now I'm definitely every trade I'm getting into, I'm trying to have a reason. For example, I have a Y-Fly bot that I trade every day, and the logic behind it is very simple. Overnight volatility is overstated. And so every single night, there's this padding in option premiums designed um, to account
Insulate the
for,
volatility.
yeah, to
Right.
account for the overnight volatility. And there, it's more premium than there actually is of volatility most of the time. And so if you trade the strategy long term, um, that's the reasoning behind it. Same thing with gamma exposure. Every one of the gamma exposure trades that I'm making, I have a reason and logic behind it. So I think that's a really important one is to always make sure that by the way, the reason can be I ran this back test and long term, it was very profitable. So that's my reason that I'm sticking with this strategy as well.
And I think that's a good one for people when they are self-doubting their strategies, like we talked about in the beginning, is like, well, I lost five in a row, so should I do the opposite? Well, it's like, well, what was the reason you got in? Because now the reason, if the reason is completely different now, maybe.
Mhm.
But if it's not, if nothing is really materially changed, why are you changing?
Right,
Like why
100%.
why
My
go back
most
and do something different?
My most recent video on YouTube, I actually talked about something similar, which is a lot of the manual trades that I've been closing, so Y-Fly and the opening range breakout, I'm closing those positions early. And the reason I'm closing them early is out of fear. The fear is that the profitable position is going to turn around and become a
Mhm.
loser. That's not a reason. That's fear. Versus when I'm making my gamma exposure trades, I'm seeing a particular strike where the gamma is concentrated and I'm making a trade for a reason with a strategy based on the information that I'm looking at. That's a good trade. Closing because I'm scared it's going to reverse. Now, if I'm looking at the gamma exposure and I can see that gamma is showing that the price could go to this particular point, which would make the opening range breakout a loser, that's a reason to potentially close the position. But fear of it reversing and turning into a loser is not a good reason. So.
And neither is it a good reason to get into trades.
Right,
Just,
100%. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's not going to work out. All right, so let's talk about a little bit about the future of option alpha. There's so much. I mean, you don't even have to say the future of option alpha. You could just say the future of just trading. But like, there's obviously a lot that's happened, I think, in the last 5 years, last 10 years. Even still, it still feels like, I mean, you've talked about this, that for the most part, most of the industry players, and hopefully we separate ourselves enough to say we're trying to push the boundaries here, but most of the industry is still very much in the same position where it's the same platforms. They look broadly the same with different color schemes and different fonts and different logos, but at the end of the day, you're doing the same functionality. So, but 10 years from now, 5 years from now, like where is everything going? Like in your
Mhm.
opinion? Like and what's the big changes? Yeah.
So I'll draw a little parallel real quick. So at my last company, we built a toolkit for people to build applications. And before every release, what I would do is I would actually build an application, a mini application that used the toolkit, and I would use the new features that I was adding. And as part of that process, I would discover the things that were a pain or the things that, okay, that's a cool feature, but when you actually try to use it, it has this problem, this problem, this problem. So before we do the release, let us address those problems. Okay, now let's try this process again, right? And this iterative process of using what I was building and solving the problems as it was going. So when I look at our parallel here with Option Alpha, it's the same thing. As a trader, I'm creating technology or I'm using the platform to actually trade on a daily basis. And as I'm doing it, I'm running into problems. I solve those problems. I come up with a new feature, and then I'm getting ready to release that new feature. And I try to actually use it to build a bot or for example, the gamma exposure sat for a long time before we actually
Mhm.
released it into back testing because I couldn't find a strategy with it that was actually profitable with one trade a day. Because the way I traded, I'm trading, sometimes 10 trades a day based on how it's moving over the course of the day. Having just one trade at one particular time during the day is not really the way that you trade gamma exposure. So it sat for a while until we ultimately came up with something that users could use. So when I look at the future of what we're doing is I think that one, it's definitely there's a lot of parts of the option trading experience that we could automate. So the more that we continue to use the platform and add new specific strategies, like one person in the community today shared, it'd be great if you could have a gamma, like some kind of crossover for gamma
Mhm.
exposure, for example, when it crosses a certain threshold. And I was thinking, that sounds a lot like the opening range breakout strategy, but for gamma exposure, that's a great idea. How can we build that into the platform and make it so that you can back test it and automate it? And so when I think about what the future of the platform is I think it's this process of coming up with, we have this foundational component of automation that's there now. We have the ability to automate the management of positions. We have the ability to back test shorter duration trades. We will, of course, be adding longer DTE trades. That process, we're already working on that, so that's in development now. But the thing that we've been doing most recently is actually coming in and checking out specific strategies that we can add as part of the package that the platform offers by default. So opening range breakout was one of the first ones that we introduced. Now we've went down gamma exposure. If anyone who's watching this video knows any other strategies that you think would be a great fit for Option Alpha, definitely post it in the community or reach out to us. Because I think the future is finding specific strategies that we can take and add to the platform, and have this great group of people all contribute their ideas, and we can create a new like opening range breakout, something completely new out of what was already there, and then make it automated.
To
So
go
that
back
would,
to what you were saying before, extensions. That's what they
yeah,
are. They're
yeah,
extensions.
exactly. Yep,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. Yep,
Mhm.
that's the next generation. And then as we build them and use them, we as a group say, okay, man, this needs this and this. Every new thing we come out with, there's a thread in the community within the next few days. Hey, this is great, but this doesn't work the way I think it
Mhm.
should. This should be like this. And that creates a whole new round of changes for us as we continue to grow the platform into what everyone is dreaming of using. I know that's kind of one of my big motivators. So
Yeah, I think we try to do that for sure. I think that's always a challenge is like how can we continue to innovate and how can we continue to build? And I know that we've never stopped that process. We don't ever sit back and say, well, that's now the final version, guys, and just stick
right.
with that for the next couple of years,
Yeah.
because every new one, like you said, just opens a new, set of doors for us. So awesome, man. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast, Jack. We really appreciate it. We actually got you in here for an interview, which is awesome. So we'll do the next one in a couple shows, right? So we'll do
Yep, sounds great.
another one in a couple shows. No, I'm just kidding.
No, no.
It'll be a thing. All right, man. I appreciate it.
All
Thanks for
right.
coming in.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone too.
All right, so I hope you all enjoyed that interview with Jack. That was a little bit on the longer side than we probably thought, but I really do hope you enjoyed how deep we went with some of the topics and some of just the background and history. I've known a lot of this. Actually, some of the stuff I didn't know. Like I didn't know he went back and tried to basically recreate the book for the casino in programming language. That was new to me, right? But like some of the other stuff I've known before, and I've wanted a lot of other people to know this story and kind of the origins because I think it does help out as a trader. It's helped me out knowing this. This is why I'm just generally a fan of other people learning from other people in the trading community. We can all learn from each other. We can all learn from each other's stories. We can take a bit and piece from this story and a bit and piece from that story and kind of put it into our own story as we go forward as traders. So I hope you took at least one thing away from this, as always, to help you in your trading journey. If you have any comments or questions, please let us know in the community or right below this video if you're watching on YouTube. If you enjoyed this one and you want to leave us a rating and review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to the podcast, we would truly appreciate it as well. And until next time, happy trading.